Could traveling back and forth through time be possible? Commonly used as a theme for science fiction novels and films, time travel always seems to make for a good storyline. In 1916, theoretical physicist Albert Einstein published the general theory of relativity. Not only does Einstein's theory say that time travel is possible, numerous scientific experiments have proven it to be true. In today's episode, we will be looking at a man who by some unknown force was catapulted 75 years into the future. We will be investigating the mysterious case of Rudolph Fentz. On a hot summer day in New York City on August 1st, 1950, a young man in his mid-20s suddenly appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, in the middle of crowded Times Square. The man appeared awkwardly out of place. Not only was his heavy clothing not appropriate for such a hot summer day, the style of those clothes were 80 years out of date. The man had a dazed and confused look on his face as he gazed up at the tall buildings, clumsily bumping into other pedestrians as he walked. Stunned bystanders looked on as the man suddenly dashed out into the street and was struck by a taxi. The man was killed instantly. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene. They went through his belongings in order to determine the identity of the oddly dressed man. His belongings included $70 in old banknotes, an invoice from a livery stable on Carlson Street for grooming a horse and washing a carriage, a stack of business cards bearing the name Rudolph Fentz, listing a Fifth Avenue address, a letter addressed to Rudolph Fentz dated 1876, and finally a beer token bearing the name of a tavern which none of the officers recognized. All of the items found on the man seemed to be in near new condition and didn't appear to be anywhere close to being 75 years old. Detective Hubert Ream of the NYPD Missing Persons Department was assigned to the case. His job was to identify the oddly dressed man. Detective Ream first checked the man's fingerprints, to which no match was found on record. He tried looking up the name Rudolph Fentz in the phone directory. No such name was listed. Detective Ream proceeded to investigate the address printed on the business cards, which was the same address from the letter. He spoke to the landlord, who knew of no such person. He also spoke with the neighbors, who said they never heard of a man named Rudolph Fentz. Detective Ream next went on to investigate the address listed on the livery stable receipt. Unsurprisingly, there was no business of that type in that area. With no other leads to pursue, Detective Ream took the beer token and went to all the bars and taverns in the Times Square area. He showed the token to dozens of bartenders and patrons. No one recognized the token. Frustrated by the lack of progress being made on the case, Detective Ream began searching through older phone directories. Finally, he came across the name of Rudolph Fentz Jr. in a 25-year-old directory. Detective Ream went to the listed address and knocked on the door. The woman currently residing at the address said that she had moved in about 5 years ago, but did not know of a person named Rudolph Fentz Jr. Undeterred, Detective Ream knocked on the neighbor's door. An elderly man answered the door and confirmed that Rudolph Fentz Jr. did live in the house, but had passed away about 15 years ago. The man said that he had been good friends with Rudolph Fentz Jr. and his wife. When the detective inquired about the wife, he said that she too had passed away several years ago. He did mention, though, that Rudolph Fentz Jr. had a daughter who was living in Hoboken, New Jersey. Luckily, he was able to provide the detective with her address. It was several days before Detective Ream was able to contact the daughter in Hoboken. She confirmed that she was indeed the daughter of Rudolph Fentz Jr. When the conversation came around to the oddly dressed man killed in Times Square, she told the detective that growing up, she was told stories about how in 1876, her grandfather left the house to take a walk one day and didn't return. He was never seen again. Did Rudolph Fentz somehow stumble into a vortex that sent him forward in time? Did he fall into a time portal that propelled him 75 years into the future? In the ensuing decades, this story has been reported and retold as being factual. In 2002, however, a researcher named George Murphy uncovered a short story written by Jack Finney titled "I'm Scared," which was published in Collier's magazine in September of 1951. The story mirrors almost exactly the details we heard here in today's episode. Murphy concluded that the story was a work of fiction that had become just an urban legend. Others are not quite so sure. In 2007, a researcher found an article in the Berlin News Archive reporting the same story as a news item. The article was published in April of 1951, a full 5 months before the story appeared in Collier's magazine. Was Jack Finney's magazine story a fictional piece, or was it a retelling of an actual event? Only time will tell.